Hi everybody, this is Kevin, and as you can see, I've got two lovely people sitting in front of me. One is Liz Housden and Andrew Norris, and I've invited Liz and Andrew along to do a Zoom chat with me, specifically to do with their love of words and poetry. I know Liz posts very regularly with her poems and things like that, which I enjoy reading. But I want to ask you both in turn the meaning of words and that to you, and when your love of poetry and words started. So Liz, can I start asking you that question?
Well, apparently, according to my mother, I spoke very young indeed, and quite in sentences and all sorts of things. I mean, I was actually quoting Shakespeare by the age of 3.
Wow.
Quite accurately, and in perfectly good context too. I mean, I was looking out of the window one day while I was helping her make the bed, and it was the time when children were going to school, and I said, "The schoolboy with a shining morning face, creeping like snail unwillingly to school," and I was only 3. Wow. And that is of course a bit of Shakespeare, and I just came out with it, and it was entirely relevant. So I think that I was an only child, so I would be spoken to a lot, yeah, by my mother all the time, and I'm sure that had a great bearing on it.
Absolutely. And Andrew, the same question to you.
Well, when I was at school, I didn't have a teacher who instilled any love in me for poetry, for literature. And it was only when I left school and I needed to get more qualifications to apply to art school that I went to an evening class, and I had a most wonderful, wonderful teacher who introduced me to John Keats. So when you asked for poems about autumn, I was very tempted to read for you Keats's poem, Ode to Autumn, but I resisted. But it was that teacher who really instilled a love of literature. And, you know, I missed all those years of school, and it was only after school that I discovered that.
So, Liz, with your knowledge of poetry, do you think this is, and your love of poetry, in a way that you were able to repeat some of the things about, that obviously helped you in your further career, which we know was in the theatre?
Yes. Yes, very much so. I think it was a natural progression to me, yeah, to go on that way. Yes.
Yeah. So, from both,
I also thought about that poem too, Andrew, and I read that to myself, and I thought, no, I mean everybody knows that poem. I will not do it. Too obvious. I actually would do the one that I did do. So it's quite interesting.
Yeah. And both, and what you've both sent me is going to be great. And just so everybody knows, what I've asked Andrew and Liz to do is to either film themselves reading or some poetry, but specifically about a season. And the season, as we're in at the moment, is autumn. They've both sent me poems of autumn, which is going to be added to this Zoom chat.
Sonnet 104 by William Shakespeare. To me, fair friend, you never can be old, for as you were when first your eye I eyed, such seems your beauty still. 3 winters cold have from the forest shook 3 summers' pride. 3 beauteous springs to yellow autumn turned, in process of the seasons have I seen. 3 April perfumes in 3 hot Junes burned, since first I saw you fresh, which yet are green. Ah, yet doth beauty, like a dial hand, steal from his figure, and no pace perceived. So your sweet hue, which methinks still doth stand, hath motion, and mine eye may be deceived. For fear of which, hear this, thou age unbred. Ere you were born, was beauty's summer dead.
And the idea is that we're going to do a seasonal, it might be 1 or 2 poems from Andrew or Liz. It could be as many as they like, really. But we're doing it as a seasonal thing. And I think this is going to be quite interesting to do. But Liz,
I like the idea.
yeah, that's great. That's great. I'm really pleased. And I've got to be honest, it came from watching a video, I think it was last weekend, Andrew, when you were going out into the woodland and you were using paint to put different words on trees.
Yes, yeah.
And that sparked this idea in my head to invite you both to do this. And I know you've done different art forms, Andrew, in the woods near you, but this specific one really sparked this idea of getting you to do these seasonal poems, which we'll add to your YouTube channels or wherever you want to share them. And the fact that you're both very keen to do this, which is great.
Yeah, yeah.
So starting with you, Liz, your favourite poets and over your lifespan, how do you think your poetry may have changed?
I suppose my greatest love always has been and always will be Shakespeare, but it doesn't mean to say he's the only poet in the world or the world has ever who's wonderful, because I just am fascinated by a lot of modern poetry, some of which I think is so appalling I just turn over, and some of it is just so rich and wonderful and relies on its modernity, and that is just as exciting as reading Shakespeare and Keats, for example, to me, because it means that each generation creates what it needs and what it wants and what it wants to say. That's R2D2, by the way. That was just my phone. And so yes, I mean, to me, poetry has never been a sort of an archaic thing that it just belonged to academics. It actually belongs to everybody.
And the same to you, Andrew. What about you?
Well, I didn't start reading poetry until I started learning a new language, and that may force me to think about the structure of words and sentences. And this only started, 20 odd years ago, and it was really fascinating when I was learning Croatian, I would isolate a sentence in a novel or something and identify the function of each word, and that enabled me to think about individual words and the potential that a single word could have to convey an idea or a concept beyond the quantity of words that we use, which is why in the project that you highlighted, poetry, just a few words, but for me the image is created which is far greater than the sum total of words.
Autumn by tehulme. A touch of cold in the autumn night. I walked abroad and saw the ruddy moon lean over a hedge like a red-faced farmer. I did not stop to speak, but nodded, and round about were the wistful stars with white faces like town children.
So I only started reading poetry maybe about 20 years ago, and I tend to favour poets of the 20th century, English, British poets. Particular favourites are like Seamus Heaney, I like very much, Keith Douglas, the war poets, Sidney Keynes, the lesser known people who I feel were just, struggling to grasp the understanding of language and to use language to express themselves. And I find poetry one of the greatest mediums to try and do that.
I know an interesting thing, Liz, yesterday I was out at Titchfield Abbey.
Yeah.
And when you look at the information there, it seems that Shakespeare's plays were first tested to see how they would go down at Titchfield Abbey.
Oh, right.
Okay. So it's just, you know, with the link of Shakespeare and where I was yesterday, and you go to Titchfield Abbey, and it's a remarkable place. So, Liz, what about modern poets? What you know? Are there any particular modern poets that you like?
Oh gosh, yes, many really. We just Lawrence Ferlinghetti, for American poets, I mean, come up with some wonderful stuff. I mean, really beautiful. And Ferlinghetti died earlier this year, and he was 102, and his stuff is just fantastic. I mean, it's
wasn't he one of the beach poets?
I think so. Yes, yes. And some of the Black writers are completely wonderful. I mean,
like
women.
Mountain, yeah.
And we always think about as not Americans exactly being a poor relation in terms of the arts, but in classical stuff, I'm sure we think we are. But it's not the case. I mean, they're just as, I mean, go back to Longfellow, for example. He didn't just write Hiawatha. He wrote many, many wonderful, stunning.
And I like that connection between painting and poetry with artists like E.E. Cummings, who tried to break down the structure of the sentence to resemble almost the way that painting had broken down the three-dimensional illusion.
Yeah, wonderful. I mean, I think there's a great affinity between art and poetry. Yes, my mother was an artist as well as and so the two have always been sort of inexplicably tied up together in my mind, and I never saw any reason to unravel it, really.
One of the reasons why I started pursuing another reason why I started pursuing an interest in poetry was because I was particularly enamored with 20th century British painting, and I was trying to find a connection with, you know, a parallel with music through artists like composers like John Ireland or Frank Bridge, or even Benjamin Britten, a parallel with painting. And so I extended that into poetry to try and find poets who are writing in a similar vein, capturing the mood of that period, which I found really fascinating.
Yes, I agree with you. And I think each era does produce what it requires. I mean, you take Oscar Wilde, who some of his poetry is just stunning. I mean, and knowing what we do know of Oscar Wilde today, you can see what was coming through his poetry, and with those who were willing and eager to understand, they were there. But if you then you just took it as a stunning piece of poetry on its own, you know. But
indeed, but I wonder whether because painting is a visual medium that you receive the image immediately, that painting maybe led the way for other developments like music and poetry, which you have to read. It takes time. It's to read a poem, to listen to a piece of music. It evolves at a different rate than the viewer looking at a painting. And I wonder whether artists were really at the vanguard of changing cultural perceptions, and then the musicians and poets followed. I wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
I think they're very similar in exactly the way that you say that. I mean, you have a look at a picture, for example, and you think, oh, that's lovely, and I like this, and I like that. And you go away and you look at the next one, and you think, hang on a minute, I'll go back. And you go back and look at the painting, first painting you saw again, and you see more in it, not just more figures or somebody hiding in the bushes or whatever it is, but you begin to feel the mood even more powerfully.
This is it. It's the mood of the era. Yeah.
And poetry, I think, is just the same. That you can have poems that you like, that you don't like, for heaven's sake. You don't have to like everything, and then you read it again and you think, hang on a minute, there's something underneath there that I hadn't spotted. And so I think, they're very, very similar.
Yes,
and as an actor, I've always, I mean, it's our job to see beneath what the playwright is trying to say or what the play is trying to get across, and we have to dig about and find that and be as subtle as we like or not, as the case may be in you know, I mean, comedy, we tend to be a bit more obvious about it, but it can be that it's just a look, you know.
Yes, yeah.
And it's so I think, yeah, the arts intertwine all the time and rely upon one another as much as anything else.
Undoubtedly, yes, yeah.
So from you both, do either of you write your own poetry? I know Andrew does bits and pieces that you use with leaves and things.
Last leaf, leaves last. Leaf, leaves, leaves, leave. One leaf left, some leaves left. Some leave, some left. Some leave last, some leaves last. Last leaf leaves last. None left, none last.
Things like that, where you construct it that way. But have you either of you actually written a full-length poem?
Well, I certainly have. I mean, I tend to write in a sequence. I did a series of 7 poems about the problems of painting landscape from an artist's point of view, but that in some of the poems, you don't know which voice is speaking. I kind of mix up different voices, whether it's myself, whether it's a character in a painting speaking for themselves, or someone else outside of the picture. So in the past, I wrote quite a lot, and in recent years, I've then orchestrated my readings of these poems just to give it to put it into another concept. I haven't written for a while, but 15 years ago, I wrote a lot. Yeah.
Liz?
I never have written much poetry. I've always felt that partly because I always felt that I wasn't good enough. And partly because other members of my family wrote poetry, and I didn't want to take anything away from them. That was their thing. And as I've said before, my mother was an artist. I mean, none of us were anything like us, well, apart from my elder son, who's a set designer. None of us really have been quite as good as she was. And I don't mean that it didn't inspire one to enjoy it, but again, I didn't want to take anything away from that. And which is why I stick to prose, I think, really. But my younger son wrote some very wonderful poetry, actually, particularly when he was at school. He didn't have time anymore. But no, it's very interesting. I stick to prose. For me,
it's so important to be creative. For me, creativity is the essence of life, whether it's painting, writing, or writing music. Anything that is creative, for me, is the reason why we are alive.
Yeah, when I was at school, I attempted to write some poetry. Not very successful, I hasten to add.
None of us start successfully, Kevin. None of us start successfully. No. The important thing is that you try it. Don't judge yourself. Just write, and every poem you write is a stepping stone to the next one. So I wouldn't dismiss your efforts. No,
it's when I was at school, I was quite a prolific reader. I read all sorts of things, and since leaving school, and I think this is a thing that has affected me in a way, is I stopped reading as soon as I left school. If it, I don't even have a newspaper now. I
can understand that.
Yeah, yes. But I will read information that I might need to go out and make a video or something like that. And but because I have to wear these all the time for my reading, when I'm out making a video, I have to get Cynthia or Steve to make the print really bold so I can read it. So I'm not in shot all the time. And in a way, I think, from my point of view, I just think that's held me back from not reading enough. My son James, I'm assuming he still is, was again a prolific reader, and he read everything. And when I've seen the poems that Liz has put up, and I read so far, and then I don't lose interest. I just stop.
Okay.
And I don't know why I do that, because I'm enjoying what I'm seeing, I'm enjoying what I'm reading, but up here I just stop, and I don't know why that happens to me.
Okay. Maybe
it's just strange. If either of you got an answer for it, I would love you to tell me.
Well, from my point of view, I think poems demand a little bit more attention than reading prose. Prose just kind of flows as you read it. The story carries you along, but poems you need to read a couple of times, because often there are, as Liz I'm sure will confirm, that there are little details which you might miss the first time round. The metaphors, the similes, all these little tricks which poets use to evoke a mood, an atmosphere, that it takes a couple of readings in order to really get the benefit out of it.
Yeah. The one poem that I love to hear, and it really gets the emotions flowing in me, is Flanders Fields.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And I think back that the fact my grandfather was in World War One, and when I hear Flanders Fields, it just blows me away, and then the tears start. So think poems like that can really get the emotions going in me.
Poetry can, undoubtedly. Yeah. But also you are invested in that poem because of all the references to your grandfather, which undoubtedly come up as you read it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I haven't, with a few poems that I've read, I can't say I've actually got a favourite, but some poems that I've read in the past are very, very short, just perhaps 5 or 6 lines. And I can't remember, there was one about spring. It was a very short, it was this year, it popped up on one of the social media sites. Just very short.
Save it for next year, when your spring season.
Yeah, but it was just the way it was written, and it was just beautiful. Just as I say, 5 or 6 lines. It was just a beautiful way that it was written. But so poems like that, for me, they really sort of get my attention.
Yes, yeah, because it deals with a subject that you can relate to.
Yeah.
So you can pin all your own references onto that poem, and you become a part of that poem.
Yeah.
What do you say, Liz? Would you agree?
Yes, I do. I mean, and talking about the war poets, since, well, they're all dead now, but most of them didn't come back.
No.
And to think that, some of the poetry is still, we still say it at the service of remembrance, and that's just one verse of quite a long poem, that the bit that we they will not grow old as we that are never grow old. There's a lot more to that poem, and it doesn't matter that we weren't here, because it still speaks to us today of these young men who never came back.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with them. They just had to go and do what they did. And where I live, in the same village as where Edward Thomas, who's obviously one of
my favourite.
Yeah, he's wonderful friend who lives in the house too, in which he
really?
One of the houses in which he lived in the village.
Wow.
And I can't walk past his house without thinking of him ever.
Yeah.
But this sounds like a visit you might have to pay them, Andrew, when you come over one time.
I'm trying to wangle an invitation. Yes. Yeah.
No problem. I've got a friend of mine, again, who lives in the village. She's a local historian, and she'll tell you anything about you know, the people who lived in the village, and it was fascinating. She's a very clever lady.
I wrote a piece of music called an elegy for Edward Thomas.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Yeah, and his name is on the war memorial too in the village, actually.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So very close
Nice.
around him. And,
Yeah.
so
I'll send you it, Kevin. I'll send you the link to the.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, love that. Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. Yeah. So we are actually getting very close now, believe it or not, already to the half-hour mark.
right.
We haven't had the half-hour warning yet, but we're getting close to it. Just that you know. So on closing notes from you both, we're in the autumn season now, and you've sent me these poems.
To Autumn by John Keats. Season of mists and mellow fruitfulness, close bosom friend of the maturing sun, conspiring with him how to load and bless with fruit the vines that round the thatch eaves run, to bend with apples the mossed cottage trees, and fill all fruit with ripeness to the core, to swell the gourd and plump the hazel shells with a sweet kernel, to set budding more, and still more later flowers for the bees, until they think warm days will never cease, for summer has o'erbrimmed their clammy cells. Where are the songs of spring? Aye, where are they? Think not of them. Thou hast thy music too, while barred clouds bloom the soft dying day, and touch the stubble plains with rosy hue. Then in a wailful choir the small gnats mourn among the river sallows, borne aloft or sinking as the light wind lives or dies. And full-grown lambs loud bleat from hilly bourne. Hedge crickets sing, and now with treble soft the red-breast whistles from a garden croft, and gathering swallows twitter in the skies.
Over. Are there any other autumn poems that you might want to actually, off the top of your head, that you want to recite now? Or is
There's
that
one by
throwing
John Clare, but I don't know.
You into the deep end too much?
By heart. I purposely, from my Imagist poetry book, chose a poem which people don't really know, but I think it's so short, it's so beautifully written and so evocative, the picture that it gives you. I mean, appropriately titled Imagist. Imagist poetry, yeah. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to attempt to splice your poems into this chat. Okay, good.
Zoom do actually restrict a lot that you can do unless you pay for the pro version. You know, and if you want to go down that route, then it's an expensive way to go, I can tell you. But other than that, if I can't, they will be added to the end of the video. So they will be there. So look, I think what we'll do is we'll wrap this one up now, but we'll be doing another one for winter.
Okay.
So perhaps early in the new year, January, February. So that gives you a little bit of time to think about it, rather than me just suddenly drop something on you like I did the other day. But look, Liz, Andrew, can I thank you thank you very much for taking part in this first one. Really appreciate your time. And
I think it's a great idea.
Great idea. Thank you for asking.
Not a problem at all. So I will get this all put together, and it will go out probably in a couple of weeks' time. But I'll let you know in advance of when it's going to go out.
Okay.
Fine, thank you.
All right. Andrew,
Yeah, and Liz, nice to
week.
chat with you. Nice to chat with you, Liz. I followed
nice
you
to
on
meet you,
Facebook.
Andrew, a lot
And,
last. Yes, to actually speak face to face. Almost
absolutely,
face-to-face.
yeah. It's,
We'll
very
have
nice.
to we'll have to try and get an arrangement where we come. Yeah, we can sort a cup of coffee out with the three of us or something.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm coming to England on Monday, so if I pass my C test, I will be on your walk next
excellent.
weekend.
I look forward to it. If you're there, I'd love it. It's about 4 or 5 miles, but it's going to be on the slippery downs and things like that. So
okay.
Yeah,
it's the company that is important.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, right, Liz, Andrew, thank you very much, and both please take care, and I'll see you again soon.
Sure thing.
Okay.
All right, Kevin. Thank you very much.
Bye, Andrew.
Bye to you,
Bye-bye.
Liz. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye. Okay.